Well, he's not the biggest star to play running back at Kansas State, but Joe Hall was certainly the biggest dude to play running back at Kansas State. When he showed up on campus in 1999, he weighed 300 pounds, and that did not stop him from having an outstanding junior season. But what makes Joe Hall so remarkable is what he's done after college and his new job as the Director of Player Development for Chris Kleiman's new program. Here's the Power Chat with Joe Hall. Welcome to another edition of the Power Chat. Today I'm joined by Joe Hall, new Director of Student Athlete Development. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
That's a cool title.
It is.
That's, you know, you can talk about coordinators and head coaches, but that title carries a lot of responsibility. You deal hands-on with these players, right?
Yes. Mainly building the relationships. I like to explain it as school counseling on a collegiate level. So building the relationships, dealing with the guys in their classes, everything from their residents, everything that you can think of that the coaches just don't have the time to do. It's kind of dropped in my lap. Really exciting in terms of being that bridge between the coaches and the players. So,
you know, in case people don't know, you played at K-State in 99 and 2001. You redshirted in between. So you came on the heels of the great 98 team. You're being recruited during that time. And we'll get into some of that. But I want to go back and talk about a few things. First, I want to start with this, kind of pause in the middle. I remember the first time you came to a press conference in the old Big 8 room at Veneer. And we heard about this guy that was a running back and almost 300 pounds. And we're thinking you're going to be, round, like a, kind of deep stagnant. You sat down and you had no belly. Have you ever had your body mass measured? I mean, I joke about being big boned. I think you're literally big boned because you did not look anywhere close to 300 on that day.
I haven't, but
Don't do it now.
Yeah, I've been, all of my life, people have always said that I weighed more than I looked like. I mean, I'm over 350 pounds now. Probably closer to looking like that than ever. But I played, my playing time was over 300 pounds the entire time that I was here. Usually when I gain weight, it's, upper body, which is just a family thing. So that's where you get most of your mass or your weight from. But yeah, I mean, it's been something that has been said since I was a young guy.
Everyone thought you were a gimmick when you were recruited, and then you played and oh, he's not a gimmick at all. This guy can really play. Do you have any clue what your 40 time was? Because when you got in the open field, you ran.
I ran a 4.63 at the combine. I was actually pretty light considering at the time. I was about 277.
A wisp.
Yes, that was a feather right there. And in high school, hand time, I was in 4.49, 4.51s, and things like that.
That's crazy, man.
So running was just one of those things that I woke up and could do. Obviously, for my size, I was always one of the faster guys. I don't know where it came from. My dad was a runner and still runs today, but in terms of the speed and just, I have no idea where it popped up.
Well, you were fun to watch, really fun to watch. I would say that in K-State football history, in terms of guys who didn't gain 1,000 yards in their career, you're the most beloved. People still talk about Joe Hall because let's be honest, you didn't get the ball enough.
Yeah.
I'll just say it. Let's go back further. Growing up in Compton, impossible for a guy like me that grew up on the hard streets of Salina, Kansas, to quite grasp. But what was your youth like?
I lucked up. Compton was a tough place to be at the time. It was probably one of the worst places in terms of violence, especially with gang violence and drug, use and abuse. I lucked up in terms of having mom and dad in the household. A dad that was good with the streets,
involved,
not necessarily from a bad perspective, but was a guy
Understood
that
it.
was respected, coached, and did those kind of things. So I had a good idea of what happened and took place outside of the house, and they understood that as well. He coached for 20 years prior to me being even thought of, and had a lot of young men that were involved in the same things that made Compton what it was in terms of the struggles. So I always told people I had a pretty good life, relatively, in terms of what some of my friends went through with having, struggling mothers, single mothers, absent fathers, dealing with the gang stuff and the drug. I really didn't have the same type of experiences with those things. So relatively, it was significantly better for me than it was for a lot of the people that I was dealing with.
Two-parent household, but I sense that you understood what's true for any young person, but probably greatly magnified in a place like Compton. The friends that you choose, you probably chose wisely.
Yeah.
And it probably guided you out. You ended up in junior college. So I take it, were you in junior college because of academics or because nobody recruited you?
It was more academic. I only had one school that I wanted to go to, which was University of Southern California. I grew up with USC on the mind. And I didn't really have any desire to play anywhere or go to school anywhere else. A lot of the schools that recruited me in high school were looking to switch positions and things of that nature, including USC. My grade point average was low enough to where I had to have a higher SAT score. Right. So I ended up taking the SAT. They changed the ruling. They changed the rule in terms of acceptance into universities. So I ended up having to get a higher score, and it was after the date.
Right.
So the fact that I played football, basketball, and baseball, and getting drafted to play baseball, I flirted with the idea of playing baseball professionally, and kind of waited to the last minute to take my final SAT chance, and then didn't get the score that I needed. So, I mean, it was an academic thing. It wasn't ever a situation where I was below expectation or anything. I always could have done I could have done better. I was capable of doing a lot better. So I always use the idea of not doing what I should have done academically to even have it a close,
right.
Even have to worry about being able to get into a school. So yeah, a lot of it was academic. A lot of it was just timing, and whatever was left over was just the idea of me having to go to UCLA over USC, which was not the plan. So
Pasadena's not bad.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
But hold on, you played baseball. What position?
I was a first baseman.
I was going to say, I hope you weren't a shortstop.
Well, I was an outfielder for the longest.
You can move.
Once I started getting looked at from professional teams, the idea was just to let them hit the ball and concentrate on catching the ball over at first and not having to stress yourself out by being an outfielder. Yeah. So that was kind of the thing that I did. I got drafted by the Detroit Tigers and did a little bit that summer with their rookie team, and that was kind of the transition, was going from being this defensive guy to the big guy position where they just stand you over there and look good and catch the ball.
So what positions do people want to move you to?
Mainly just defensive.
Yeah. D tackle?
Yeah. I don't know what they saw other than size. Obviously, I know what they saw. I didn't do anything defensively that would make you think that I would be a standout defensive guy. I always played running back, from my freshman year through, all the way through junior college. And defense was one of the things that I did well, but it wasn't something that if you watched me on film, you would see flashes of this guy, and then he just took off the last 10 plays and then got a sack. And, so I understand what they saw, but I never wanted to play defense. So when those things came up, a lot of schools flirted with the idea of me playing tight end, being an H-back type thing before it was really that position where they did both H-back, fullback, and tight end type things. But mainly it was just the idea of playing fullback, which was, as a lead blocker, not something that I wanted to do.
No, you were running back.
Yeah, so most of them,
I always said I thought you would be an NFL D tackle if that had been the position you invested in, just because that size, speed, and quickness is just a rarity.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So you go to Palomar. What was life like at Palomar for you?
It was great, man. I had a ball. I was young, so I graduated at 17 from high school. So it was the first time that I was away from family, even though it was 2 hours up the road, a 2-hour drive. It was the first time that mom and dad weren't telling me when to go to sleep and do all of the, so I had a ball. We moved into this house with one of my best friends that I grew up with. He went down with me. I actually went with him. And we stayed in like this 5-bedroom house, and it was kind of like the real world, like the show, The Real World. And it was great, living in San Diego area and just having a ball,
That doesn't suck at all.
Just having a ball. And we took care of our business in terms of academics and stuff like that. Football was always, one of the things that we handled pretty well. But just the idea of being almost borderline adult type thing was great. I had a ball.
So you're going through your second year at junior college in '98, correct? When K-State is at the top of college football. Everyone's talking about that '98 K-State team. But I assume you still wanted USC to come knocking. Yeah. Did they? They
did. My two final schools were USC and Kansas State. And by that time, I had some more experience with other coaches, with and the guys that were actually at USC when I decided that USC was where I wanted to be were at UNLV at the time, and that was John Robinson,
yeah, sure,
the old Rams coach, and loved that guy growing up, and so I started considering other schools. USC was one that was still talking the fullback thing, the lead blocking thing, so it was a chance. I started understanding that it would be a chance that I ended up somewhere else. So.
Kansas State comes knocking, and Bill Snyder had coached under Coach Robinson briefly.
Yeah.
And was there anything that kind of reminded you of Coach Robinson and Coach Snyder?
I can't say then because I didn't know John Robinson that well, like on a personal level.
Saw him from afar.
Yeah, so it was the appreciation of him as the Rams coach, which was always a Rams and Raiders kind of guy, Rams and Raiders town. So just the idea of thinking, man, you could play with a coach that coached in the NFL, and that was more the connection there. When Coach Snyder first came onto the scene, as far as I was concerned, I really didn't have any idea what he was about, so it was literally Kansas State being delivered to me and from zero, and let's see how far it could get kind of thing. And they did a very good job of doing so.
They did a marvelous job back then of recruiting junior colleges. They, that 97-98 junior college recruiting class really changed college football because it proved that you could succeed at the highest levels with junior college players, and before that it was kind of taboo. You probably ran into that some on the recruiting trail. We don't do this. At what point did you start to focus in on K-State and begin to come to terms with the fact that I might be going to the middle of Kansas to play my college football?
So I spoke to Ron Hudson, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, and he was my area scout. And the very first time we spoke, he said, well, let me say what I said first. I said, Kansas State, that's the team that has the black quarterback. And, and I knew Michael Bishop from that. I couldn't think of his name at the time, but I remember that comment very well. They have the black quarterback. That's cool. Okay. And knew KU from basketball, and having guys like Paul Pierce and Jock Vaughn and guys that were from California. So always attributed Kansas to Kansas Jayhawks. But I did know of Michael Bishop.
Yeah.
So when I mentioned that, Coach Hudson said, he laughed, was on the phone and he laughed and he said, yeah, we have some other guys too. And I thought that was kind of cool. And just like KU was in basketball, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas,
right.
Big 12 guys, those teams were heavily represented by guys from California. So when he mentioned Nebraska, who was at the top of the heap at the time, he said, I think we have the team that can beat Nebraska this year. And when I heard that, I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard in my life. Kansas State is not going to beat Nebraska. I don't even know who else is on Kansas State's team. Like, seriously, it's just, but it stuck with me enough that I was going to pay attention to that game. Shortly, and this was prior to any games being played that season. Shortly thereafter, Kansas State went on a run and obviously, beating up, I think it was Indiana State earlier.
Yeah.
And it was just like, man, they could have scored 100 points and started paying attention a little closer, and the number, the ranking started popping up a little closer. And I was just like, man, this is, so that's where it generated, was just the idea of Kansas State actually, as far as we were concerned, popping on the national scene. And what I mean by national scene wasn't the fact that they were ranked, but people were actually talking about them.
They were fun, dynamic team.
And then guys were, magazines were saying, can they beat Nebraska? And I thought that was like cool. Like, man, this coach gave me kind of like the inside, scoop on this. And, I was a young kid and hadn't been on that level at all in terms of media presence or anything. So it was just great that when that came about, and that game came, and K-State was undefeated, Nebraska was, I believe, undefeated at the time too. It was just one of those things where it was like, man, this is exactly what he said was going to do. When they won the game, it was pretty much a slam dunk that Kansas State was going to be in my top schools of choice. Was still pretty fearful of going away to school, and I don't think it was a fear of like culture shock or anything like that, or weather or anything more than it was just the idea of switching from a California kid, the idea of not going to a California school. Even that high school experience where I was saying I was sure that I was USC or not, I had considered UCLA pretty, heavily, which was probably the worst thing that I could do in my mind at the time. But going out of California was not one of the things that I was looking forward to doing. So they did exactly what they needed to do in terms of convincing me and kind of just putting themselves at the top of the list in terms of my recruiting process.
You sign, you show up. Any culture shock?
Initially, I didn't see too much of anything other than the way that things look. You're so entrenched in football.
Right.
I still had classwork that I needed to do. So I was in the facility. I had, paid for a tutor. My parents had to pay for the tutor. I was locked into those things. So I was in love with the facility, which is crazy. It was like a tenth of what it is, now. But I was like, man, this is cool. They have computers in here. Everybody's working for you. Like whatever you can talk, you can go downstairs and lift weights. Like, man, this is the best thing ever. So I was in love with the idea of Kansas State football. I didn't really get into the community. Most of the interactions that I had with people in the community were all great because everyone was excited about, the 98 team and then what we were adding to this team. And obviously with the L. Roberson coming in and replacing Michael Bishop or Jonathan Beasley taking that, it was just, it was a great time. So a lot of the culture things I didn't get to until later on. But just from the look of things, it was, I walked to the facility and it smelled the cows and the sheep, and that was huge and different. And I was like, man, I got to tell my buddies that I go to a school and play at the stadium, and there's like animals across the road. And a lot of the animals I saw were animals that you just didn't see.
Of course.
So I see squirrels now, and it's like common, it's like a fly, a house fly. And at the time it was like, man, a squirrel, like, that's a rabbit. That's, and we don't see those, too many cars running around. Yeah. So it was just, those from a highlighted point and a light side, those were kind of culture things that, and environmental things that I was like, man, I'm not in California. This is totally different. One of the things that I also remember was the men that you would meet. I would meet people in the grocery store, and they would always, touch you and shake your hand, and that was different. So that was one of the things, probably from a negative standpoint for me, that made me uncomfortable. That was different than I was used to, because I tell people in LA, you just don't. You don't contact. Yeah. That can go a million different ways, and it's not usually a positive thing. So that was kind of different for me, but it was, all in from a positive thing at that time. I was just like, this is exactly where I need to be. I need to see these things. This is different than I've, and I feel comfortable and safe. So that was always a positive.
Young Joe Hall comes to Manhattan, Kansas, still not bought into the academic thing, which you have now, obviously. We'll get into that. But you had a lot of lessons to learn. You made some mistakes. You had a couple of arrests early on. Yeah. One was a minor in possession, I think. Half the student bodies had that. The other was a gun charge. My favorite Ron Hudson quote. Ron and I were pretty close, and I would sit in his office back in the day when reporters were allowed to wander the halls, and we'd talk. And he told me the greatest quote about you, that you told him, Coach, the gun was unloaded, and where I'm from, that's the right thing. Yeah. And that just struck me. I'm like, that is, yeah. As a white guy from Kansas, I don't think about these things, but but you still learned the lesson that that's not the right thing here, and you didn't really need it here.
Absolutely.
That had to be a shock to the system to think, well, I don't really need to be carrying this around here.
Yeah, and this will probably be the first time that I had to tell the story, from the true perspective and the way that it happened. I had actually gotten, it was my firearm. I'd actually gotten it from my roommate at the time, who had taken it down, who was, well, we'll leave that what it is. He was doing, and the comment that I made to Coach Hudson was that when I retrieved the firearm, that I unloaded it and I stuck around for a little longer than I should have. He asked me, why didn't you just get home? And that was the kind of, well, it's unloaded, like, that's not a big deal. And it really,
paperweight at that point.
Yeah, it really didn't cross my mind of concealed weapon. It didn't even cross my mind. I knew even then that I shouldn't be obviously in the bar or around other people with a firearm. There was no need for it, but it didn't even cross my mind that was one of the, I didn't think anyone would ever think that I was out to protect myself or do anything of that nature. So that was one of the toughest ideas, was just the perception of it more than anything else. Once that happened, and then you link everything else and lump everything else together, then it kind of developed this personality or this character that I wasn't necessarily pushing for, but that was kind of the head of it all, and when you mess up on the field, well, that was the guy that was carrying the gun, he's from Compton, then you put all of these things together that weren't necessarily, they shouldn't have been career killers. But as an adult, I see it differently. I take full responsibility for it, because there was a million different things that I could have done differently to avoid that situation. But I mean, that was part of it.
If I recall, I don't think I read a single news story that said unloaded handgun. It just said handgun.
Yeah.
And so, okay. Play your junior year. Let's talk football. 613 yards, 6 TDs, had 300-yard plus games, and there's some pretty good running backs in the program. I think David Allen, Frank Murphy. There's some dudes that could play, but you really broke out that year. How good did that feel when you just start racking up the 100-yard games?
It was great, man. That was one of the, being a young guy and thinking, as a young kid, youth sports, that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted to go to college. And it wasn't ever about an NFL thing. It wasn't ever about Major League Baseball. It wasn't ever about the NBA. It was always college. I love the college game. To get into a junior college and being a top guy and then thinking, holy crap, is my talent going to transfer to the next level and it be seen? When I showed up on campus, and I still tell people today, Frank Murphy was the fastest human being that I had ever seen run in shirts and shorts. And listening to his times, listening to his heights, the lifting thing, it was just like, oh my goodness, I'm never gonna play here, And this was before putting a helmet on, like this. What can I do to get here? Then they have this guy, David Allen, who people know about, and it was like, this is amazing. He's running back a kick, punt every time they kick it to him, like obviously another fast guy, much faster than I was, obviously smaller, but and it was just those kind of things where you're thinking, where do I fit into this? These are guys that are already popular, already known, hardworking guys. So when I did get my opportunity to carry the ball and do well with it as the season went on, it was a big weight off my back in terms of I can do it on this level, and I don't know that I ever thought that it wouldn't go well, but that was always my fear. It was, what if you go there and, some of these things happen, with injuries instead of the charges. What if something happens with, an academic situation from way back that, would halt that opportunity? And it didn't really matter to me. Only thing that mattered to me was that I didn't want to go home as somebody that didn't do well in football and didn't do what I was supposed to do. So that was always the fear, when I wasn't in the best shape of my life, that was just kind of one of the things. It was so natural for me to do these things that I had to learn what like hard work was. I had to learn what like pushing yourself past the limit was. I don't think that I've ever ran a sprint and not made the time in terms of one at a time, but I had to get to my maturity stage where it allowed me to do as well as I could instead of just coasting through. So that was the academic issues too, was, okay, I need a 2.0. Okay, I'll give you a 2.0. And then you fail a test or you don't do as well on a test and it drops to a 1.9. And now you're scrambling to be ineligible instead of just getting the 3.8, 4.0 that you were probably capable of doing. That was my entire life at the time, was just, as they say, maximizing the minimum, and so, I mean, I did a lot of those things, if you were 250 pounds, you would be this fast. Well, I'm 300 and I'm this fast. That's pretty cool. It was never a challenge of, let's be as great as we could be. So that was kind of the fear there, was just the idea of, I'm not in the greatest shape that I could be in. I have all of these other things going on, but the one thing that I could always hold my hat on was that I could play football. And, that kind of fixed all of the issues with the culture changes and the issues that I was having in ideology and with coaches or whatever the case was. Once I got the ball handed to me, then I felt like everybody would understand, what I was about.
So you redshirted in 2000. What was it, grades?
Yes, well, the combination of everything. Yeah.
You were in Coach Snyder's dog.
Yes,
which is not a fun place to be.
Absolutely not. And it was a long time coming. Me and Coach Snyder had several conversations, and I've probably spoken to Coach Snyder 10 times in my life, and 9 of them were out of correction of things that I was doing wrong.
Get your you-know-what together.
Yeah. So I tell people all the time that I had a different relationship. I saw him from a different angle than a lot of people were able to because of those situations. But yeah, it came down to it. He told me that I wasn't going to be on the team. He didn't want me around the facility. But I was I wasn't going to be on scholarship. He would allow me to work myself back into it. But I wasn't going to be able to work out with the team, practice with the team, and all of those things. So that was probably one of the rude awakenings, or those awakening moments where you realize for the first time, you're not playing football. You're not going to be the one that people are cheering for, or even want to see out there. Like you don't really even exist. I went to one of the games that year, and I stood right in front of the locker room. Obviously, before it was beautiful as it is today, and I stood right in front of the locker room and watched the game and realized that they were cheering for guys that my brothers, my guys. But had no idea that I was even in the stadium, and I don't think anyone really cared. And that was one of the things that hit home, was that it'll go on without you. So either figure it out or chalk it up.
And you did.
I did.
But you didn't play a ton in 2001. You didn't get the same kind of carries, and it wasn't a great season for K-State. It was kind of a shock to the system, going 6-6 overall. And as we kind of wrap up this first half of this interview, that you go to the NFL, you just kind of knocked around, didn't you? You never quite found your space. Who all were you with during your NFL times?
I signed as a free agent with the St. Louis Rams right after my senior year. Was with the Chiefs for a couple years, and then finished in Oakland in 2006. A lot of that was more of the carryover of not understanding what hard work was. I think in the NFL, they took more offense to the fact that you have this talent, you have these abilities, you have these natural gifts, and you're squandering them for lack of a better word. You're just not maximizing those talents. Unfortunately, I always went to a position or a team where they had the position that they needed, and I was going to have to do something pretty amazing to have even an opportunity to be on the practice squad, just because the fullback position at the time, the big halfback was not necessarily the thing for everybody. So it was just a difficult thing you had to be perfect with it, and I just wasn't willing to do those things. Wasn't able, hadn't been asked to do those things in the past. So although I took these great bounds personally, in terms of my work ethic and things like that, it just wasn't enough of what they were accounting for. I remember Dick Vermeil told me, word out of his mouth, that he would take a kid that was half my talent, that busted his butt, than to give me the luxury of just flopping around and getting away with things because I was so talented. And he said that in tears, as Dick Vermeil does a lot. And it wasn't to attack me. It was just a slap in the face. Yeah. And it was one of the things that was probably one of the most powerful things that I had ever heard, because that's really what it was all about. Was you have these gifts, and I'm not gonna reward you for not getting the most of them. So,
well, you kind of trip through life getting by, and you're in your early 20s, but you did figure it out. We're going to shift gears after the break and start talking about the Joe Hall that became this Joe Hall, a remarkable man that has really changed his life and embraced education. It's amazing the things you've done academically since then. Well, we will be right back with the second part of the Power Chat with Joe Hall. And now we continue our Power Chat with Joe Hall, who now works for K-State. We talked a lot about the Joe Hall that got by. And let's advance now to you're out of the league. You got to face life without football. You set up shop in Arizona, correct? And you start working with youth, probably more from a sports standpoint. But it doesn't take you long to realize you need to work with these kids on more than just sports. Yeah. So you developed a program called Change Your Aim, and I'm intrigued by it. Run through in your mind at that time what Change Your Aim was.
Okay. Well, prior to actually the Change Your Aim program, I was doing the speed and agility, sports related movement stuff with a lot of the young kids in the area. Arizona being a place where a lot of former athletes in general of all sports come and set up shop after their careers or even in the off seasons. It was a big boom of trainers and things of that nature. So everybody that had any knowledge of anything was trying to get into some type of personal training. When I started with the kids, I realized really quickly that a lot of these kids had ability. A lot of these kids were talented. And there was a reason why such a widespread number of talented kids that just don't get to where they wanted to get, or where they wanted to go, or where they planned on going. And then I just subconsciously started thinking about these things and how could you ensure or heighten the opportunities or increase the opportunities of these kids having greater chances of being successful, especially in the sport. The Change Your Aim program came about. I didn't have a degree at the time.
Right.
I didn't have my undergrad. One of my good friends was actually from my neighborhood is Gene Boyd, and he's at Arizona State University. He's an associate athletic director, I believe, there. And he had been in Arizona State for years, went to he's an alum. And we had done a lot of conversations about what I wanted to do long term and how he could incorporate what I wanted to do at the university. And, and I think the idea was that I had a degree. So we went through, I met all of these wonderful people at Arizona State down in Tempe, and we get to the final, stretch, and, what are we going to do here? Are you wanting to do an internship? Are you willing to do, man, I just want to get in, just show me how to get here. So what did you get your degree in, was the question. And I was like, well, I didn't get a degree, but I majored in sociology. And he's like, well, you didn't graduate? And I was like, no. He's like, well, we can't even go any further. How can we speak education and speak, future planning without you having those things? And it was, and he's 10 or so years older than me, was, kind of a big brother all through my life. And it got to a point where it was like, Big Brother was telling me that I needed to go handle those things. I think the realization that for the things that I wanted to accomplish, for the things that I wanted to do with my life, it was ultimately going to come back to the thing that I stayed away from, which was the education part of it. Not necessarily from a learning perspective, but actually sitting in the classroom and doing tests and things like that. And I just couldn't imagine with the things that I had done in my life personally that I would want to ever go back that route. But it was a necessity. So it came down to, I left that meeting and went right home and told my wife that I wanted to enroll in classes. I knew we had the Second Wind program at Kansas State. So that was the easiest way of me, Phil Hughes was still here at the time, I believe. And I contacted everybody that I needed to. They pointed me in the right directions. And it just started with me getting in the class and actually doing everything online and feeling like I could do this. I could really do this. And because I didn't have all of these other things going on, because I had cleared some mental space in terms of my own mental health, it just didn't seem as hard as it once did. It just, the classes actually aligned a lot better when you're not failing classes and not, withdrawing from classes and not taking classes to replace other classes. Things just kind of lined up so much easier and so much more simple.
You got out of your own way.
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what it was. It was once all of those outside influences, internal influences cleared, then it was just a matter of, you're a smart guy, you can handle the work, let's just get it done. You have passion, you have dreams, let's go towards them. And it wasn't, well, they don't want to give you the ball, they don't want this, they don't want, mom wants this. It wasn't all of those things. It was just the difference of transitioning from, a boy that can't handle, all of these things to a man that is managing them a little bit better. So
having a wife kind of changes that too.
It does. It does. She is definitely the voice of reason a lot of times. So if not all the time.
I'm not sure where she's from, but I mean, you come back to Kansas. How many kids did you have at the time when you relocated?
We relocated. We were, I believe, 2 children.
2 children.
I believe.
Worked your way up to 4. We'll get to that.
Yes. 3 children.
3 children. Okay. You get your degree. Boom. That's done. You go to Mid-America Nazarene. I'm going to coach. But something more happened at Mid-America Nazarene. You didn't just coach. You fell in love with academics, didn't you?
I did. I had Jonathan Quinn was the head coach then. He was a backup quarterback when I was with the Chiefs. So we went in the game quite a bit together, a lot. We were kind of packaged to, he was the 3rd quarterback as the season went on, and me going on the practice squad. We spent a lot of time down on the other end with the defense. And he was a great guy, really talented guy, just big arm guy, and actually a big quarterback guy that was athletic beyond, what you would believe in terms of his stature and position. So he was a guy that I paid attention to, all through my career and his career. And when I heard that he was coaching, it wasn't ever a true idea. Man, I need to get into coaching. This is my passion. This is my calling. It was just an idea of this is someone that I can use that can point me in the right direction. So I reached out to Coach Snyder at one time and told him the same thing. Like, I don't know what I want to do, but I do want to do something where I'm working with young people. Obviously, the background is athletics, but just point me in the right direction, And so Coach Snyder reached out to some high schools. Jonathan Quinn had done the same thing, and then they obviously neither had anywhere for me to go. And then Jonathan called me probably a month later and said that he had a position opening up. In the NAIA level, you get in, you can coach anything. I played running back. I ended up coaching wide receivers the first year. Had never done that before, and so he said, I have to do this the right way. I'm going to interview you, and I'm going to see what you know about the position. We went through it, and it was a good thing, and it was a good fit. But getting there, I had that same feeling that we're just not doing enough to put these kids in the best position that they need to be in. Obviously, with the NFL not looming for a lot of NAIA kids, you have to kind of love the game first and foremost. Financially, it's a great commitment because you're not getting full scholarships. And then just the preparation of when you're done here, you immediately go into the real world. Right. And I didn't think even, we were winning games, and I didn't think we were doing enough in terms of preparing these kids. Obviously, with it being a Christian school, a Nazarene school, everything was based on this faith of service. Yeah. And it came down to that for me. I was just like, man, I never was able to put a tag on what I wanted to do. And I was like, man, I really feel more natural serving people than anything else. It was nothing. I always thought that football was what I was put here for, but it was never, or athletics was what I was put here for. But I could never reach the same amount of people that I was able to with just trying to be there for them and building those relationships. So the first year I did that, and then I immediately wanted to go into graduate school for school counseling. Initially started out wanting to do mental health, and then once I got into the program with the background being athletics, they kind of nudged me in that direction, which I ended up agreeing with. And that was kind of the beginning of the academic commitment. Was how are you going to tell these young people, once again, to do these things that you're not willing to do? For so long, my story had been, I had a 2.0 grade point average. I had a point such and such grade point average at this time, and you could do so much better. Like you can't, and it just became part of my story that as a 30 whatever age man at the time, I didn't want to hear the negatives about my story anymore. I did, especially academically. You know, now that I have my own children who are in school, it was hard for me to say, you know, I expect you to get straight A's because you're capable. Although they were never going to see my report cards, I should get straight A's because I'm capable. I mean, that's what I'm preaching. And it really just became that. No one was watching. You know, the wife she didn't even have access to it. So, I mean, I didn't have to tell anybody what I was bringing home in terms of grades. But it just became one of those things. You know, it became something that I wanted to stand for in terms of just the excellence part of it, you know, the achievement.
You can be told the right way to do something day in and day out. It doesn't matter until you tell yourself.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like you did. You got your master's from Mid-American Nazarene, and you did master's work at K-State in counseling. Yeah. You don't technically have your master's in counseling?
I do. I actually just took my comprehensive test and passed it. So
so you got 2 masters.
I do. 2 masters.
Christmas. Show off. And you're working on your doctorate.
Yes.
How far along you're into thesis, aren't you?
I am. I'm a year. I just did my first residency, which is a year into it. And then I have a couple more courses, actual classroom courses. And then I will go into my preparation for my dissertation. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You're going to be Dr. Hall?
I am.
Are you going to make all your buddies call you doctor?
I am.
Good. I would do it with like a French accent. You got to call me doctor. You know, something just to really mess with them. But that's amazing. It literally is. Because you know, I thought about getting a master's. I'm like, I don't have that commitment. I'm done with this. And you did the opposite. You fought yourself a long time, and then you embraced yourself, and what you've done is amazing. But let's be honest, getting a bunch of degrees doesn't mean you're going to get a bunch of money either. Right. So you go into counseling, Topeka High, Junction City, anywhere else I'm missing?
No.
And start working with kids. What was that experience like?
I mean, it was great. I actually did, before the high schools, I did my internships and my practicum studies while I was still in the program at elementary schools. You had to do primary and secondary. So I started off in the elementary schools, and I didn't think, I was like, man, this big black guy is walking into this school. No one's going to talk to me.
Step on anyone.
You know, like I'm going to have to reach out to these kids and kind of pull things from them. And it was the total opposite. Like I walked on the campus the first day, I came in a suit, and I walked on the campus and these kids just swarmed me. I was like, man, this is amazing. Crazy, like, and it was totally uncomfortable, like I don't know what to do. I don't know where to step. I don't, want to offend anybody. And then we get in, and that was the routine every day. Like, it just became like, that's what they counted on. So, I mean, it kind of confirmed that that's what people were looking for, was those connections. And these kids come from, I was in Topeka, which is Whitson Elementary. They come from the top of the line to the bottom in terms of economic, socioeconomic status. And it didn't matter. I walked in, and, one of the girls' dad was a surgeon, and she was like, man, you look a lot like my dad. And it was this young blonde white girl, and I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I don't look like your dad, but that's, and he was just a big guy, and I met him later on. He wasn't as big as I was, but he was a bigger guy, and that's what she attributed, and then you had your young black student, whose dad may have been absent or dad may have been incarcerated, whatever the case was, and they related to you from that perspective. And then you had the Hispanic student, and it was just the most fulfilling thing that, to be that person for them, that it didn't really matter. It was a million different things that these levels of education that I have the path that I've gone on, I could have tweaked and ran into a bunch of money. But I did the NFL thing and never felt really complete about that either, but when I went, and I drove an hour to Topeka every day to go out there and finally feel like a superstar. Like I really felt like a superstar, not from, notice of anything that you could do for them, but just who you were, just being there. And that was huge. And I would have signed off on my decision 100, I would do it 100 different times because of that, that connection. Going into the high schools, it was a little more difficult to generate those connections initially, but once you did, it was, and you hear stories about these young people and things that they're going through that would make you, quiver in a corner, even the things that I witnessed growing up where I was. And I couldn't imagine, a ninth grade kid or eighth grade kid going through certain things. I couldn't imagine those young kids at Whitson Elementary going through the things that they had experienced. And then having those experiences, having those connections, having those stories told to you almost removes any chance for you to feel sorry for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's where it got to. It's like, man, I'm tired. I have 4 kids. Oh my goodness. We have a tournament this weekend. I don't want to do this. Oh, the boy wants to go out and throw the football. And man, this young girl is getting such and such done to her at home. Tighten, get it together, man. Let's go. And it became bigger than me. It wasn't about the time that I was putting in. It was about why I was doing it and why I showed up every day. And that's basically where I am now, is just wanting to be something for somebody else.
You end up at Junction City, so now the commute's mostly gone. It's still a commute. Similar job, and you're in a good groove. Mm-hmm. You really are. And then the phone rang.
Yeah.
Before that, you'd started up a K-State Facebook page, the Pulse of K-State or whatever it is, which I enjoy. I'm on. I think guys like me ruined it. It was mostly ex-football players originally, and then you let dorks like me on it, and it's not quite the same. But your phone, and it made you. It was an interesting choice because we knew Joe Hall was around. We knew Joe Hall was counseling, but none of us had interacted with you. And I remember interacting with you over social media and going, "This dude's legit. He's got his crap together." And people must have noticed. Your phone rings. Once Chris Kleiman came in, and it was Sean Snyder, correct? And they describe a job to you that is change your aim all over again.
Yep.
Do you almost feel like you weren't on your right path for a long time, and once you put your feet on that path, it's like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And now if I keep going forward, I'm going to end up where I need to be.
Yeah.
And here you are. It must be incredibly fulfilling to know that you had impact on young people's lives. It's gotten you to a better point. Not that working in high schools isn't significant, but you're back in college football. You're working with guys who also have problems, problems you faced at the same place. That's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and the idea was, my wife would always say, like, I see you at a high school. I mean, I see you at a college. I see you with older, student athletes. And because someone else was making that determination, the knucklehead that still resides in me was a little hesitant to truly embrace that that's what I wanted to openly admit to, that college is where I wanted to be. Kansas State University, of course, was where one of the places that I wanted to do what I was doing. But when the phone call came, and it was weird because the day before, me and my wife were talking about potentially the chance of having to move outside of Kansas to kind of see some of these opportunities that have been mentioned by other people. Her having a good job and being in a great situation was something that we were reluctant to even consider, but needed to start having a conversation. And we literally did the night before, and her response was that we're not going anywhere. So I was perfectly comfortable at Junction City. I was trying to figure out, going into my second year, what I could do that would help the situation, not only for myself, but for everybody that was involved, and where we could eventually take the program. And then, Sean calls me when I'm in meeting with a student, And the phone rings, and I look down, and it says Sean Snyder, and I'm like, I don't want to answer the phone, but it's, it's Sean Snyder. What could this be about, kind of thing. So I ignored it, continued talking to the student, and then the text message comes through, and now I'm like, this could be one of a million different things. But so I continued talking to the student, but I'm preoccupied with this text, man. I didn't touch the phone. I'm just sitting there, and then I'll say, hey, will you go on and go to lunch, and then you come back after lunch, and we'll talk some more, and if everything is okay, then just go back to class. If not, feel free to come back in. So they walk out, and I grab the phone, and it says, we have this thing that we've been interviewing for. Would you be interested in? And it could have been, it's not too many things it could have been that I wouldn't have been interested in, just listening to what they thought of me, or what they thought of where the direction of the program was going. So I said yes. He hadn't really explained what it was at the time. He went right into, setting up the interview process and the different meeting people points of contact and things of that nature. So when he finally gave me the itinerary for the interviews, I asked, so what is this position about? And he said, I'll send you the job description. So he emailed me the job description, and it was literally the program that I had spoken to Gene Boyd at Arizona State about doing. If it was, and the question that Gene asked me was, if you could do anything that you wanted to do, like if you could draw up a position, a job for you, a career to do, like what would you do? And it was dealing with student athletes to get them better prepared for transition into college, transition, throughout college, and then transitioning into their life after, athletics. And when I read the description, I honestly thought it was a joke. Like, this is are you kidding? Like, this is out of my computer, it's literally, I'm like, what is going on? Then I'm like, I actually asked my wife, like, is this serious? Like, are they serious with this thing? Like, she was like, I don't know what's going on. And so interviewing for the position, I felt like I needed to tell everybody that, and I felt just like a little kid, it's like a dream come true type thing, just to even be considered for it. Almost too good to be true kind of thing. I was like, man, I hope they're not just interviewing me just to be interviewing, because I was pretty comfortable in what I was doing. I'm going to be pissed off if I don't get the opportunity to do this, because
it's a state job. You got to interview a minority.
Absolutely.
And you're probably sitting there thinking, I'm the guy that they're going to talk to.
Absolutely. And I really hadn't, the way that I translated it off of the paper, I took it where I wanted it to go, which was more suited to what I was bringing to the table. Oh man, I'm a counselor. I do this. I do, it didn't necessarily say those things specifically. So I needed to speak to someone that had an idea of what the position was going to be. So, in those conversations, the first time that I spoke to Coach Kleiman was the first time that I had ever spoken to him, in my interview. And the first thing that I said was, like, I really don't even want to leave here, because, like, I think this is the perfect thing for me. Like, I don't want to leave and let you guys make a decision one way or the other.
Move into my office?
Yeah, like, just let me sit over here until you guys decide it, and I didn't want to come off like I'm, for whatever reason, guaranteed that, I'm going to get this job or anything, but like, I couldn't imagine anybody being more prepared or qualified for that position. So that's what I dealt with. It was the idea of, my phone's ringing. Please stop. All right. It was just the idea of having the opportunity that I knew that I was so prepared for and I'm so passionate about, in terms of helping young people. Obviously helping young people that came from and were doing the exact same things that I had done years ago, and was so passionate about. So that's ultimately what it was. He agreed that it was important that we would have to reach out. We would have to have a position that was able to reach out to these kids and kind of, or these young men, and be able to relate from a different point of view. The beautiful part of all of the dumb mistakes that I made was that I became pretty experienced and knowledgeable
you got the scars
of how to navigate those things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I didn't want credit or to make those things seem like they were the path that these young people needed to do or go, in hopes that they could dig themselves out of the hole, because I've seen hundreds of guys go similar paths and not get the same opportunities that I have gotten, or that I've positioned myself to be able to receive. So I don't want to ever come across like, hey, have a great time when you're in college and do these things and go out in Aggieville and do, and
learn from them. Look what happened.
No. I'm telling you so you don't have to do those things, and how much better it could be if you did avoid those things. And even with the success that I've had, where I could have been differently, and the scars that I shouldn't have, that I've kind of just self-inflicted type things. So I mean, it was still almost unbelievable that it happened the way that it did, but I'm forever grateful.
So what was your first official day on the job?
I don't know.
Was it May?
I can't remember.
Yeah, we're in late July as we record this. So you really haven't been on the job a long time.
No.
But as you go to your office in the big, new, incredible Veneer Family Football Complex, which, there's been a building in between the one you had and this one that they redid in the, in the 2000s. Surreal?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can't even put in words what that trek was like. I walked up the stairs, went on the elevator, and it was like, this is where I should be. Never thought it would happen. I hadn't even seen certain levels of the complex yet, the facility. So I mean, it was great. I sat in my office and I immediately wanted to get to the root of the things that I needed to do. Like it was, I think I posted like 9 pictures of myself in different K-State gear, and it was just like, this is where everything should be. This is it. Then it immediately switches over to not wanting to disappoint anyone, including myself, most importantly. But just wanting to hit the ground running and taking over that position and making it my own, for the benefit of the team and for the program. But still, I sit in there sometimes and I'm like, I talk to my buddies on the phone and they're like, hey, do you have, can I send you this information on this kid or this player? And I'm like, what? Oh, yeah, I guess I can, I can pass it on this, and it's just that idea that I've been doing these things without this position for so long. Like I've been, I've had friends that have called to have me have, communication with their nephews or cousins or so-and-so that are, struggling with certain things or dealing with certain things, or some that just want guidance through, certain processes of, the NCAA things, and now it's you get paid for it. So I mean that makes it a little different, but at the same time, like I look at some of these young men, they walk into my office and I can almost see myself, like it's almost, I put a little picture that I got from the media guys, and it's an old picture with curly hair and all of this thing, and I sit it on my desk, and then a guy like Eric Gallen, that walks in, and I'm like, man, it kind of looks like the same crazy hair that I had at the, and it just takes me right back to that, and I want to be that guy that I felt like I needed at that time. So beyond all of the education and things that I've done, and things that you should do in counseling and shouldn't do in counseling, and things that you want to look for in terms of service, and it makes it real easy to even wash all of those things away and just say, like, what did you need at that time? Like what was missing from what made you feel like you should make the decisions that you did, and that you would be okay one way or the other. And a lot of that was just the absence of having mom and dad close enough, feeling like you had adults that were willing to kick you in your butt, but really, really cared, and you knew that they cared. You knew that they cared because they were kicking you in your butt and still dealing with you. So that's just what I try to do.
I don't mean to be melodramatic here, but it's, a kid from Compton found his home in Kansas, place to raise a family, accomplished a lot. I mean, raising kids in Manhattan, Kansas is radically different than LA.
Absolutely.
Well, congratulations on all of it. And we've got people up on the Ring of Fame for All-Americans in yardage and all that. And I'd take your accomplishments any day. It's really cool. Okay, let's wrap this up with something we call the overtime. We asked one of our subscribers, I think you probably peeked at our message boards, it gets a little interesting, to give us 5 questions that are a little bit off the beaten path. And we do this in our podcast, so we brought it over here. This is from Purple Powerhouse, which I thought was a perfect, that could be your screen name. Maybe it is. Maybe I don't know who Purple Power. Maybe you just ask yourself these questions. Question 1: did you have any game day rituals, superstitions you did?
I did. I had to go. I used to try to show off my arm. I wanted Coach Hudson at the time to let me throw pitch passes quite a bit. So I would go out on the field pre-game and throw the ball as far as I could to my other guys and catch the ball with one hand. And there's probably 50 people in the stands at that time. Not a big thing, but you could always feel like they were watching you at that moment. So always wanted to show off my arm. I did that all through high school. And you could almost feel when you threw the ball that, that electricity, that, that was good.
Part of football.
So I just, it was one of the things that for pre-game ritual, that you just continue to do it, and started off real selfish and just became one of the things that you did just because it was a routine. So,
did you ever have a weird encounter with a fan that sticks out? You mentioned people in the store touching you.
I had a few.
Anything we can share?
That's the tricky part. Probably off of, we get emails all the time, and I think at the time, I don't know how it is now. I'm pretty sure it's the same, but you could look up the email of someone. So the first time that I ever used my K-State email, I went in and it had like 1,700 messages in there, and actual messages, and for whatever reason, that click was on a young lady that was from Nebraska that was. And the internet wasn't what it was then as it is now, so, but anyway, she ended up coming to town to tell me that I had been communicating with her the entire, and it was all clean. It was just, appreciation type things, but she showed up in Aggieville, and it was one of the weirdest things because I never thought that, you would generate a relationship with someone of any sort with, just from linking up on an
Joe
email.
Hall's what she wanted. Steaks, rare, medium, well done, burnt. Don't say that.
I like mine medium, I believe. I think I did medium rare one time and it was a little too rare. I'm
a rare guy. I'm weird.
Yeah.
This is the biggest question for me, if you follow me on social media at all. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
That's the right answer. It's the right answer, because he said any response other than dog is wrong. Yeah. I'm a dog person. Okay, as a teacher, for someone that worked with youth, he's also a teacher. What was your best or worst teacher experience?
As a student?
No, when you were guiding students. You want to call what you did a teacher?
Yeah. The worst is just, I'll start from that end. So many different, like I said earlier, so many different stories that you hear that you almost want to just take the kids home with you. And that was probably one of the most heartbreaking things for me, was the idea that you can't save everyone. You can't fix the problems all the time. One of the things that I struggled with most in my education portion of my school counseling career was the idea of our leaders in school counseling to tell you that you're not going to be able to reach everyone. You know, coming from competition, it's a win or loss type thing. So am I winning or am I losing? And the answer was you were going to lose a lot more than you win. And I just couldn't handle that, just the idea of that. But I've heard some stories that, like I said, will break your heart.
Yeah.
And I think the most disappointing thing is just not being able to have the power or the ability to fix those for those people, for those young kids especially, families in general. And then on the other end of that is just the idea, one time we had a young girl that was going through some things, and offered to have her come home with my family and I and stay with us until they could figure some other things out. Obviously, being a man, that creates an outside perception that you have to be careful of. Having a 15-year-old son who was the same age as this young lady, creates some issues in itself. And it was just the idea that a bunch of people stood up and stepped up for this young person that were in a better situation that could help her, was confirmation that we were doing what we were supposed to do. And you look at it from a win and loss perspective, that was a definite win. This is a young lady that was self-harming, had been abused, all of these types of things, that ended up graduating this year without any hiccups over the last couple years. And I think just the interactions with her early on were that confirmation that you needed, that this is going to be fine. And it didn't start off as a relationship that you sought out, or it was just in conversation that you found these things out. So stepping away from the win and loss part of it is, you never know the effect or the response or the quality of what you're bringing to the table. Just do it and hope that it works out for the best.
That's a Big 12 title of counseling right there. Yeah. That's pretty good. Well, Joe, I appreciate it. And we didn't talk football hardly at all.
No.
We're going to do this again so we can talk football, because you really know your football, even though you're not coaching. I want to dig into that football mind of yours at a later date. Well, that's it for this edition of the Power Chat. We appreciate you coming along with us, and we appreciate the folks at Blue Mark Energy.